descriptions of the conversation, which seem to suggest that the president didn't reveal any sources and methods, but described a fairly sensitive intelligence around a program that concerns the ISIS ability to put laptops on computers that could be loaded up with explosives, and seemed to suggest the city in which some of this was learned and so forth. So, Congressman Schiff, since you sit on intelligence and are familiar with the difference between revealing sources and methods, which nobody's alleged here happened, and describing the program in some detail, tell me what part of this we should be concerned about and what part isn't all that concerning.
Well, what we should be concerned about, and again, have not yet been briefed on it, so I can only go on the basis of what's been alleged publicly and what the administration response has been. But the allegation is that the president discussed a threat to the country from ISIS with sufficient detail that the Russians could determine what the source or method of gathering that intelligence was. So the denials by the administration, as I read them, and I'm reading admittedly between the lines, are really a form of non-denial denial. That is, stating that the president did not discuss war plans is a bit of a non sequitur. Saying that the president didn't specifically comment on sources and methods is also a bit of a ruse if, in fact, what the president did was reveal sufficient detail that the Russians could therefore conclude, reverse engineer in a way, what the actual source was. And what's the implication of that? Well, it could compromise the source of information, so that source could dry up or go away, or if it's a human source, it could be worse. If the source is a sister intelligence agency of a friendly country, that country could decide it can't trust the United States with information, or worse, that it can't trust the President of the United States with information. That obviously has very serious repercussions, and particularly if we're talking about information about a threat to Americans posed by ISIS. So, again, I can't say whether these allegations are accurate, but if they are, and certainly the President's tweets suggest that he talked about something of concern here, we immediately have to go into damage mitigation mode. Find out what steps can we take to minimize any risk to our sources, and if the damage is to our allies, what steps we can take to reassure our allies that we treasure the relationship, we treasure the information, and we're going to work much harder to protect it in the future. And then I have to hope that someone will counsel the President about just what it means to protect closely held information and why this is so dangerous ultimately to our national security.
For either of you, but Senator Murphy, let's start with you on this. The President made an argument in his tweet this morning that basically he's trying to bring the Russians over to be more active against ISIS. And we've certainly seen cases where presidents of both parties, President Obama, President Bush, revealed some intelligence information without the source in order to go motivate another country to help along. You might, to put it in another context, tell the Chinese more about the North Korean missile program if you're trying to give some urgency to the sense that they've got to back them up on sanctions. So could you argue that this is the kind of thing that presidents sometimes just have to do?
Well, you could argue that if you were under the belief that this White House was operating in a way that was anything other than foreign policy by improvisation. Mm-hmm. Yes, you are right that in previous times, other presidents have decided to share classified information with so-called adversaries, but they only did so after consulting with the intelligence agencies and having a whole of government approach to declassifying that information. It was strategic. This clearly, as far as we understand, was not strategic. And the idea that Russia is going to be a responsible partner in the future of Syria is belied by years and years of facts on the ground. We have been trying to get the Russians to be a meaningful partner inside Syria, and they end up doing more damage than good. They end up conducting themselves in a way that kills, hurts, and maims civilians, such that more, not less, people on the ground inside Syria are pushed into the camps of extremists rather than to moderates. So we have enough experience inside Syria to understand that Russia is not going to be a credible partner. And you are right that there is a reasonable way to use classified information in order to win new friends or influence adversaries. But that's not what happened here. This was a president who was trying to show off how much he knew in the context of that meeting, and potentially did serious jeopardy to immediate U.S. national security concerns, as we are finding out today that some of our allies are already rethinking whether or not they should share information, or rethinking what kind of information they should share with the United States.
Can I just add that Chris is exactly right, and the point he's making is also far broader than this context. If you look at many of the president's statements or tweets that have an impact on foreign policy, they all have an improvisational character. Some have an erratic character to them. We try to look for a method in this when there may be none. And if you look at some of the comments he's made about North Korea, for example, and you ask, is this some part of a clever art of the deal strategy of saber rattling or whatnot, you might conclude that was true if this was done in concert with others in the administration in a cohesive fashion, but too often it's not. And it looks like the president has one foreign policy and the Secretary of State has another and the UN ambassador has the third, and no one is quite sure who to believe. And as much as we may try to rationalize it and explain it, the reality is that we have created not a strategic ambiguity, but a very non-strategic and dangerous ambiguity about where we are, what we stand for, what we want to see happen, what our policy is.
So we mentioned North Korea briefly. I wanted to turn to that before we get back into the Russia investigation. So the other fascinating intelligence leakage story that's going on right now.
All right, you're listening right there to Congressman Adam Schiff and Senator Chris Murphy in a panel at a progressive conference that David Sanger of the New York Times is moderating this conversation. Let me bring in the panel right now, and I want to also draw your attention to that little box in the corner. We are waiting for the President's National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, to brief reporters, to come and take questions from reporters in the White House briefing room about this new crisis unfolding at the White House over what the president told Russian officials. Did he disclose highly classified intelligence to Russian officials in his Oval Office meeting? Running a little late at this moment, so he could come out at any moment. We're watching that play out. With me right now, Kayleigh McEnany is here. She's a CNN political commentator, contributor for The Hill, and a